I still remember that evening. The sky was gray. Heavy. As if even the clouds knew something in my life was about to end. My name is Maeve. I'm 69. And until a few months ago, I was just an ordinary grandmother living an ordinary life. Every morning I'd wake at 6. Brew my coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for 20 years. And water the African violets my late husband adored. It was a simple, quiet routine, steady, peaceful, familiar. That night, I wanted things to feel warm again. My daughter, Dawn, was coming over with her husband, Dave. I spent the whole morning preparing their favorite meal, chicken and dumplings. Just the way Dawn used to love it as a child. I laid out my best embroidered tablecloth, the one I made when she was 15, and placed fresh flowers in the middle of the table. The smell of warm broth filled the house, and for the first time in months, I caught myself humming. I truly believed this dinner might bring us closer again. When they arrived, that hope shattered. Dave didn't even say hello. He walked straight into the living room and dropped himself into my late husband's armchair, the one I still couldn't look at without feeling his presence. He grabbed the remote and turned on the TV like he owned the place. Dawn stood there, her expression cold, her voice flat. "Mom, we need to talk." I wiped my hands on my apron, forcing a smile. "Of course, sweetheart, but let's eat first. I made your favorite." She didn't sit down. Instead, she glanced at Dave, then looked back at me. "Dave and I have made a decision. This house is too big for you. You can't take care of it anymore. We found a nice retirement community, clean, safe, and with people your age. You'll love it there." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. My hands started trembling. "This house," I whispered, "this is where you took your first steps. Where we celebrated every birthday. Where your father took his last breath holding my hand. Memories live in the heart, not on walls." "Mom," she said, crossing her arms, "you'll be better off surrounded by people who can help you. You deserve that." Dave finally spoke without looking up from the TV. "We'll take care of everything. Mrs. Maeve, don't worry about the paperwork." My stomach twisted. My own daughter, the child I had worked nights for, cleaned offices for, sold cupcakes on weekends for, was throwing me out of my own home. "I need time to think," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "There's nothing to think about, Mom," Dawn replied coldly. "It's already decided. The appraiser's coming next week." And just like that, they left. They didn't touch the food. The flowers began to wilt on the table as the soup cooled. Untouched, I sat there in silence, surrounded by all the things that used to mean family, now just reminders of how quickly love can turn to convenience. That night, sleep refused to come. I wandered through the house touching old photographs on the wall. Dawn in her first school uniform. Dawn in her graduation gown. Dawn on her wedding day. In every picture, I was beside her, smiling. Proud, certain she would never forget what I had given up for her. But I was wrong. The next morning, Dave came back, uninvited, with a man in a gray suit carrying a clipboard. "Good morning, Mrs. Maeve," the man said politely. "I'm here to evaluate the property." They walked through my home as if it were a museum exhibit. "The pipes are old," the man said, jotting notes. "These tiles are outdated, you'd have to replace the whole kitchen." I wanted to scream. My husband had laid those tiles with his own hands when Dawn was 10. Each one represented a day of labor, a piece of our history. But to them, it was just outdated. When the man left, Dawn handed me a brochure, smiling that fake, sweet smile she used when she wanted something. "Look, Mom, they have bingo nights on Tuesdays. There's a nurse on duty all day. It'll be fun for you." Fun. That was the word she used while planning to strip me of the only thing I had left, my home. My dignity, my memories. That evening, I sat in the dark. The sound of the clock ticking in the kitchen like a cruel reminder that time moves on whether your heart is ready or not. I had spent my life building something for my daughter to inherit, never imagining she'd try to take it while I was still alive. But something inside me, something small and stubborn, refused to die that night. I didn't know it yet, but this humiliation would be the spark that woke me up. And soon, they would learn that the woman they called too old to fight had more power than they could ever imagine. The next few days passed in a blur of humiliation and silence. Every morning, I'd wake up to the same four walls. But the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a stranger's home. Like I was already gone and someone else was waiting to move in. I barely ate. I barely spoke. And when the phone rang, I didn't answer. I couldn't bear to hear Dawn's voice pretending everything was for my own good. On the third morning, I heard the front door creak open. Dave didn't even knock this time. He just walked in, wearing that smug grin that made my stomach twist. "We'll need to start sorting your things, Mrs. Maeve," he said, as if I were some old tenant being evicted. "I'm not leaving," I replied quietly. He smirked. "You don't really have a choice. Dawn will handle the legal part. You know, there's a process for these things, especially when a person isn't mentally capable." That word, mentally, hung in the air like poison. "Are you threatening me?" I asked. Dave gave a fake laugh. No, just trying to make this easy for everyone. We don't want to involve the court, do we?" He left with that same smirk. And I realized something chilling. They were serious. My own daughter and her husband were ready to have me declared incompetent just to take the house. That night, I couldn't sit still. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore, from anger. I began walking through the house, touching old furniture, opening drawers, searching for something, anything, that could remind me who I used to be before they made me feel small. In the bottom drawer of my husband's old desk, beneath some yellowed papers and paid bills, I found a small folder tied with a faded string. On the front, written in my husband's neat handwriting, were his initials. There was a tiny lock on it, one I had never noticed before. My heart began to race. Why had he locked this? I searched for the key in all the usual places: his toolbox, his coat pocket, the small wooden box where he kept his cufflinks. Nothing. Finally, I remembered his favorite book, the one he used to read every night before bed. I opened it, and there it was, a small golden key pressed between the pages, marking a passage about investments and legacy. My fingers trembled as I turned the key and opened the folder. Inside were papers, official documents, property deeds, bank statements, more than I could process at first. But one line, printed in bold letters, made my breath catch. It was a will, signed just 6 months before he passed away. I blinked through tears as I read. My husband hadn't just been a modest office worker like I'd always thought. For years, he'd been quietly investing, small properties, company shares, stocks that had grown beyond anyone's expectations. And then I saw it. All assets, properties, and accounts are to be left in full ownership to my wife, Maeve Williams. My daughter, Dawn, will inherit a portion only if she cares for her mother with love and respect in her later years. I gasped, covering my mouth. He had foreseen this. My husband had known. Tears streamed down my face as I continued reading. There was another page, handwritten, a letter addressed to me. My dearest Maeve, if you are reading this, it means I'm no longer there. I wanted to leave you something more than just security. I wanted to leave you freedom. You've spent your life taking care of us. Now it's your turn to live in peace. I never trusted Dave. I saw the greed in his eyes, the way he spoke about money. So I made sure that everything is protected in your name. If Dawn loves you, she will never have to worry. But if she ever turns against you, you have the power to defend yourself. Use it wisely, not for revenge, but for justice. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed until my tears soaked the paper. And then, something else caught my eye, an envelope with a bank logo. I opened it, and what I saw nearly made me drop it. My husband had been receiving rent payments from an entire apartment building. The account was still active, still growing. The building where Dawn and Dave lived. For 2 years, since his death, every rent check from their apartment, and all the others in the building, had been deposited into an account under my name. I hadn't even known it existed. I stared at the numbers on the statement, my hands trembling. They had been planning to take my house, not knowing I already owned theirs. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: power. The kind that doesn't shout or threaten, but waits, watches, chooses its moment. For the first time since my husband died, I smiled. The woman they thought was weak was about to remind them who she truly was. The next morning, the sun filtered weakly through the curtains, lighting up the folder still lying open on my kitchen table. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my husband's handwriting: use this power wisely. Not to hurt, but to protect. Those words rang in my head like a promise. For decades, I'd been the quiet one, the accommodating mother, the widow who smiled politely even when she was disrespected. But now I held proof that changed everything, not just money, but power, and a plan that my husband had prepared long before he left this world. I spent the morning reading every single document. There were property deeds, share certificates, letters from banks I didn't even know we had accounts in. The more I read, the clearer it became: my husband had built a quiet empire, and he'd left it entirely to me. By noon, I made a decision. No more tears, no more pleading. I was done being the helpless mother they thought they could manipulate. At around 3, I heard a car pull into the driveway. The sound of that engine made my stomach twist. Dave's shiny SUV. I quickly gathered the folder and placed it neatly on the table, right where he would see it. When they walked in, I was sitting calmly with a cup of tea. "Mom, why aren't you packing yet?" Dawn asked, her tone irritated. "The movers are scheduled for next week." "I'm not leaving," I said simply. Dave gave a sarcastic laugh. "Oh really? And where do you think you'll go? Mrs. Maeve? This house is already listed for appraisal. You can't stop the process." I looked him straight in the eye for the first time in months. "You're right, Dave. I can't stop it, but I can change it." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I slid a few papers across the table toward him: the property deed, the rent statements, the shareholder certificate. He picked them up, glanced at them, and laughed again. "This is cute. Did you print this off the internet?" Dawn looked over his shoulder, her face paling as she recognized the address on one of the documents. "Dave," she whispered, "this says the apartment, the one we live in, belongs to me." I finished for her. "The entire building does. Actually, every rent payment you've made for the past 2 years has gone directly into my account. My late husband made sure of that." Dave's laugh died in his throat. His face turned red, then pale. "That's impossible. Check with the property registry if you'd like," I said calmly. "It's all public record. You've been paying me rent since the day you moved in." The silence that followed was delicious. Dawn's eyes were wide, her hands trembling as she held the paper. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I didn't know myself until yesterday," I replied. "Your father wanted to protect me. And he was right to." Dave slammed the papers on the table. "You think this changes anything? You're still old, and you still can't live here alone." I smiled, not cruelly, but with something deeper. "Then it's a good thing I can afford any help I want. You see, Dave, I may be old, but I'm not helpless. And unlike you, I don't need to lie or steal to survive." He glared at me, that thin mask of charm finally cracking. "You can't do this. You can't just throw us out. We're family." "Family?" I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue like poison. "Family doesn't threaten to have you declared incompetent. Family doesn't pack your memories into boxes while you're still alive." Dawn stood frozen, silent, staring at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. "You wanted power, Dave," I said quietly. "Well, now you're standing in front of the woman who has it." He opened his mouth to argue, but I raised a hand. "You have 30 days to leave my house. And I suggest you use that time to find somewhere else to live, because as of next month, you'll be receiving an eviction notice from the building owner." "You wouldn't dare," he snapped. "Try me." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking behind us. Dawn's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he was." "Save it," I said softly. "You chose not to see." Dave muttered something under his breath and stormed toward the door. "This isn't over, old lady. You'll regret this." As the door slammed behind him, I felt something shift inside me. The fear that had lived in my chest for weeks was gone. replaced by calm, by certainty, by something fierce and alive. For the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't the one losing. Dawn stood by the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please, just listen." But I didn't answer. I picked up my husband's letter again, the paper now wrinkled from my shaking hands. He had seen it all coming. He had known who Dave really was. And he had trusted me to finish what he started. That night, I sat by the window with my cup of tea and looked out at the dim lights of the city. Somewhere out there, Dave was plotting, and Dawn was torn between shame and fear. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because they had both forgotten one crucial thing. You should never underestimate a woman who's been quiet for too long. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. No phone calls, no text messages, no sound except the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of old wood under my slippers. But for the first time in weeks, that silence didn't hurt, it felt peaceful. I made my coffee, took it to the kitchen table, and reread my husband's letter. Every word of it felt like a heartbeat, steady, protective, alive. He had given me something priceless, not just money, but the power to choose my own peace. Around noon, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. When I looked through the window, I saw Dawn's car. For a moment, I hoped she'd come to apologize, to say she was sorry for everything. That she'd realized how wrong it was to treat me this way. But when she stepped inside, I knew that wasn't the reason. "Mom, I came to help you pack," she said, carrying empty cardboard boxes. "If we start now, we'll be done before the movers arrive." My chest tightened. "You're still going through with it?" She didn't meet my eyes. "Mom, please, let's not make this harder. It's for your own good." Those words, "for your own good," stabbed deeper than any insult. I looked at her, really looked. The daughter I'd raised with love, patience, and sleepless nights wasn't there anymore. In her place stood a woman with polished nails, an empty smile, and a voice that didn't sound like family. "Dawn," I said softly, "you're packing up your own childhood. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It means I care about you," she replied coldly. "I want you safe." "Safe," I repeated, almost laughing. "Safe from what? From my own home? From the memories of your father?" But she didn't answer. She started folding my clothes, stacking books, shoving family photos into boxes without looking at them. Every time she sealed one shut, it felt like a nail hammered into my heart. Then she found it, my jewelry box. Inside were my wedding ring, the earrings my husband gave me for our 20th anniversary, and a small gold chain that had belonged to my mother. "These will be safer in a deposit box," Dawn said, putting them in her purse. "You could lose them at the retirement home." "Those are mine," I said sharply, stepping forward. "Put them back." "Mom, please don't start." "Put them back." For the first time, she looked at me like I was the problem, like I was unreasonable, unstable, the way Dave had always wanted her to see me. "Mom, you're getting upset again," she said slowly, in that calm, condescending tone that boiled my blood. "You're proving our point. You can't take care of yourself." I froze. That was it, the final betrayal. My own daughter was using my emotions as proof of my weakness. I felt the walls closing in, my breath short and heavy. "Get out," I said quietly. She blinked. "What?" "Get out of my house. Dawn, right now." "Mom, please. Go." She stood there for a second, stunned, then turned and left, clutching my jewelry bag like it was hers. The door slammed behind her, and I collapsed into my husband's old chair, shaking. The house was half empty now, boxes stacked everywhere, the walls bare. My home looked stripped of its soul. I stared at the spot where my husband's photo used to hang and whispered, "They think I'm broken, but you knew better, didn't you?" That night, I didn't cry, not anymore. I sat at my desk with the folder open in front of me. The documents neatly spread out. Property deeds, bank statements, proof, power. And for the first time in my life, I began to plan, not how to survive, but how to fight. Because this time, they wouldn't just learn who I was. They'd learn what happens when you try to destroy the wrong woman. 3 days passed before I saw them again. I spent those days in quiet preparation. I made copies of every document, scanned everything into a flash drive, and called an attorney, Victoria, an old friend of my husband's colleague. When I explained my situation, her tone sharpened immediately. "Mrs. Williams," she said, "what they're doing isn't just cruel, it's illegal. You have full ownership. They can't touch that property without your consent." "Can they still try to declare me mentally unfit?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "They can try," she said, "but it won't hold, especially with medical and legal proof that you're perfectly capable." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled with relief. Someone believed me. That evening, I sat by the window with my cup of tea, waiting. I knew they'd be back, and when they came, I'd be ready. Sure enough, just as the sun began to dip, I heard the car pull into the driveway. The sound of tires on gravel didn't make me shiver anymore. It made me smile. Dawn walked in first, her face tense. Dave followed, his usual arrogance replaced by a forced grin. "Mom, we came to talk." "Good," I said calmly. "I've been waiting." They exchanged a quick look, the kind of silent coordination bullies always have before they attack. Dave laid a thick stack of papers on the table. "These are the transfer documents. It's just a formality, really. Once you sign, everything will be taken care of." I took one look at the papers, then at him. "Transfer? I thought you were selling the house." Dawn hesitated, avoiding my eyes. "Well," Dave said smoothly, "we decided it's better for the family to keep it under our name. You'll still be taken care of course." I felt something inside me click, not panic, not fear, clarity. I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady. So this was never about helping me. It was about taking what's mine. Dave's fake smile vanished. "You're misunderstanding." "No," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "For the first time, I understand perfectly." Dawn flinched, but Dave pressed on. "Listen, Mrs. Williams, let's not make this harder than it has to be. You're almost 70. It's normal for older people to forget things, to get confused. Dawn's just trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I repeated, standing up. "By stealing my home? By lying to me? By trying to have me declared incompetent?" Dave's tone darkened. "If you refuse to sign, we'll have no choice but to go to court. The judge will see reason. You're not in a condition to manage your affairs anymore." I met his eyes and smiled, slow, deliberate. "Try it." That one word made him falter. "I've already spoken to my lawyer," I continued, "and I have every document I need. The will, the property deeds, the bank accounts, all legally under my name. And one more thing, Dave, I own your apartment." He froze. Dawn's face went pale. "You're lying," Dave said finally. "That's impossible." "Check the registry if you like," I replied. "Every rent payment you've made has gone to me. Every month. For 2 years. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Dawn looked between us, horror spreading across her face. "Dave, is that true?" she whispered. He didn't answer. I stepped closer. "So before you talk about my mental state, maybe check your own paperwork. Because as of next month, you'll be receiving an eviction notice. 30 days, that's all the law requires." Dave's mask cracked. "You can't do this. We're family." I let out a small laugh. Family doesn't manipulate each other. Family doesn't threaten to throw their mother out of her own house. "You'll regret this, old lady," he hissed. I leaned forward, meeting his glare with calm certainty. "No, Dave, you will." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Dawn stayed behind, trembling. Her hands clutched the papers like they were on fire. "Mom," she said softly, her voice cracking, "I didn't know he was doing this. I swear I didn't." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be. The one who used to cling to my apron and call me her hero. "I want to believe you, Dawn," I said quietly, "but belief has to be earned." Tears welled up in her eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "Start by returning what's mine," I said, "and maybe, just maybe, start remembering who you used to be." She nodded slowly, but I could see the shame written all over her face. That night, I sat alone again, staring at the papers on the table, my proof, my protection, my justice. For the first time in months, I didn't feel powerless. They thought they were dealing with a fragile old woman. But what they didn't realize was that I'd spent a lifetime surviving storms. And this one, this betrayal, was just another storm I was about to conquer. By the next week, word had spread through our small town that something was happening at my house. Neighbors whispered, some stopped by pretending to check in, their eyes flicking curiously to the moving boxes stacked by the door. I smiled at them politely, offering tea as if nothing was wrong. Let them talk. Soon, they'd have a story they'd never forget. That Friday, Dawn and Dave came again. Dave was wearing a cheap suit, the kind men wear when they're trying too hard to look powerful. Dawn looked pale and exhausted, but I could tell she was still under his spell. Mom, let's be civil, okay? She began softly. I smiled. That depends on what you brought this time. Dave stepped forward, holding a thick envelope. Papers from our attorney. We're filing for guardianship. Once approved, Dawn will have the legal right to make decisions for you. For a moment, my heart stopped, even though I'd expected it. Hearing the words out loud was a punch to the gut. You really want to do this? I asked quietly. It's for your safety, Dawn murmured. Safety, I repeated. You keep using that word when what you really mean is control. Dave smirked. Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Either you sign the transfer now, or we let the court declare you unfit. I let out a slow breath, then stood up. My movements were deliberate, calm. Well, then, I guess it's time I show you something too. I walked to my husband's old desk and pulled out a neat folder. Inside were the copies Victoria had made for me, property titles, bank statements, the will, and notarized proof of ownership. I laid them out one by one on the table like cards in a winning hand. What's this supposed to be? Dave asked, his tone mocking. Proof, I said simply. Proof that this house, the building you live in, the shares you profit from, they're all mine. And that means every threat you've made, every lie you've told, is useless. Dawn leaned forward, her eyes scanning the documents. Her face went from confusion to disbelief, and then to horror. Dave, is this true? Dave snatched the papers from her, his face flushing red. This is a bluff. You think you can scare us with old paperwork? I stepped closer, meeting his eyes. You can verify them anytime. The documents are registered, notarized, and backed by the same law you're trying to use against me. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, fear. You should be careful, Dave, I said softly, because when you file false guardianship claims, it's called fraud, and that's a crime. Dawn's voice cracked. Mom, why didn't you tell us any of this before? Because I didn't know, I said truthfully. Your father wanted to protect me, and maybe protect you from your husband. He saw what I refused to see. Dave slammed his fist on the table. You think you can humiliate me? You think you can take everything away from us? You already did that to yourself, I said, my voice calm, measured. He took a threatening step toward me, but Dawn grabbed his arm. Dave, stop. He yanked it away. No, she's been manipulating us this whole time. Can't you see that? Enough, I said sharply. If you don't leave my house right now, I'll call my lawyer and the police. And when they arrive, I'll make sure they know you've been harassing me and forging documents. He stared at me, breathing heavily, trying to find something to say. But there was nothing left to say. He stormed out again, slamming the door so hard that one of the picture frames fell to the floor. Dawn stayed behind, her shoulders shaking. Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know he'd go this far. I looked at her, my heart torn between anger and pity. No, you didn't want to know. There's a difference. She nodded, wiping her tears. You're right. Then her hand went instinctively to her stomach. She hesitated, then whispered, Mom, I didn't mean to tell you like this, but I'm pregnant. For a moment, the room went still. The ticking of the clock was the only sound between us. My breath caught. Pregnant? She nodded. 5 months. I was going to tell you after everything settled. I sank into the chair, speechless. My daughter. The one who had betrayed me was carrying new life inside her, my grandchild. A storm of emotions clashed inside me: shock, anger, heartbreak, and something dangerously close to compassion. Does he know? I asked finally. Yes, she said quietly. He told me not to use it against you. That it would make you weak. Of course he did, I muttered. Dawn fell to her knees beside me, her voice trembling. Mom, I've made so many mistakes. But please, don't let him take my baby away from me. For the first time, I placed a hand on her shoulder. I didn't forgive her, not yet, but I saw fear in her eyes that reminded me of my own. Long ago. You've chosen the wrong side for too long. Dawn, I said softly, but maybe this is your chance to start over. She nodded through tears. Please, Mom, help me. I looked toward the window, where the evening light poured through, warm and golden, a light that felt almost like my husband's presence watching over us. All right, I said finally, then we'll fight this together. Because this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about family, redemption, and the legacy of a man who had seen the truth long before anyone else. And deep down, I knew, this was only the beginning of a much bigger battle, one that would end in a courtroom. Under the cold gaze of justice. 2 months later, the day I had both dreaded and waited for arrived. The courthouse loomed tall and cold against the pale sky. As Dawn and I walked up the steps together, I could feel her trembling beside me. She was 6 months pregnant now, and the weight of everything, her guilt, her fear, her unborn child, seemed to press on every step she took. Mom, what if the judge believes him? She whispered. He won't, I said firmly, not when the truth is on our side. Inside, Dave was already there. He wore a new suit this time, slick and expensive, but his arrogance couldn't hide the cracks beneath his confidence. His lawyer sat beside him, a man with sharp eyes and a colder smile. The moment Dave saw me, his expression hardened. He leaned toward his attorney and muttered something. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd seen that look before, the same look men wear when they think they've already won. We took our seats. My attorney, Victoria, placed a gentle hand on my arm. Let me do the talking, she whispered. I nodded, clutching my late husband's wedding ring in my hand for strength. The trial began. Dave's lawyer stood first, walking slowly before the judge, his voice polished and calm. Your Honor, this case is about manipulation. He gestured toward me with feigned sympathy. A mother who used her wealth and influence to destroy a marriage. She convinced her daughter to leave her husband and fabricated stories to control her family. We have evidence that she used financial leverage to turn her daughter against her own husband. He turned toward me, his eyes glinting. We're asking for full custody of the unborn child and control over the family's financial assets to ensure they're managed responsibly. Dawn gasped. He's lying, she blurted out. The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court. Then it was our turn. Victoria stood gracefully, her voice clear and strong. Your Honor, what you've just heard is a story built on deceit. But we have the truth, and the proof to back it. She placed several folders on the table. Text messages showing years of emotional abuse. Recordings where Mr. Foster threatened to have Mrs. Williams declared incompetent. Witness statements from neighbors who heard him shouting threats. And finally, financial records proving that every asset Mr. Foster claims belongs to him is, in fact, legally owned by Mrs. Williams. The courtroom murmured. Dave's lawyer objected, but the judge raised a hand. Overruled. Continue. Victoria's tone softened. This isn't about revenge, Your Honor. It's about a woman who spent her life giving everything to her family, only to have them try to strip away her dignity in return. It's about justice. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. The judge, an older man with graying hair and sharp eyes, looked down at me. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, softly, he said, Mrs. Williams, Maeve Williams? I blinked. Yes, Your Honor. He took off his glasses. Studying me, there was something in his expression, surprise. Maybe disbelief. You don't remember me, do you? He asked quietly. I'm sorry, I don't. He smiled faintly. 30 years ago, you worked in family court. You were a clerk for Judge Miller. I was a young intern, nervous, unsure of myself. You helped me find my confidence. You told me one day I'd be a great judge. My breath caught. And then I saw it, the boy with kind eyes, who used to stay late filing papers while I brought him coffee. David Morales, I whispered. You were that intern. The judge's smile deepened, tinged with emotion. I never forgot your kindness. Mrs. Williams, you treated everyone with respect when no one else did. Dave's lawyer jumped to his feet. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is a conflict of interest. Judge Morales raised his hand calmly. There's no conflict in recognizing decency, Counselor, and the evidence before me speaks for itself. Dave's face turned ghostly pale. His lawyer sank into his chair, realizing the tide had turned. After a pause, the judge spoke again, his voice steady, firm, and clear. It is evident that Mr. Foster has manipulated and emotionally abused both Mrs. Williams and her daughter. The court denies his petition for custody and guardianship. Furthermore, a restraining order will be placed, and all legal costs will be paid by Mr. Foster. The gavel hit the desk. Case dismissed. For a second, no one moved. Then I felt Dawn clutch my hand. Mom, it's over. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at her. No, sweetheart, I whispered. It's finally beginning. Dave stood up, rage twisting his face. You think you've won? This isn't the end. But the bailiff was already stepping forward, and Victoria leaned toward him with an icy smile. Oh, it's the end, Mr. Foster. The law just made sure of it. Outside, as Dawn and I walked out into the sunlight, the world felt brighter, lighter. The same courthouse steps that had once filled me with dread now felt like the path to freedom. Dawn turned to me, her face streaked with tears. Mom, how did the judge know you? I smiled softly. Life always finds a way to bring kindness back to you when you least expect it. And as we stood there, the sunlight warm on our faces, I felt my husband beside me, not in body, but in spirit, whispering the same words he'd written in that letter. Use your power wisely, my love, not to hurt, but to protect. I had kept that promise. But I also knew the story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes, the hardest battles begin after the victory. 6 months later, my house smelled like fresh bread and blooming violets again. The same home they once tried to take from me was now filled with life, laughter, and the soft cries of a newborn. My granddaughter, Serenity, had just arrived into this world, and holding her in my arms felt like holding a second chance. Dawn stood beside me, smiling through tears as she rocked her baby gently. The woman standing there was no longer the cold, distant daughter who once looked at me like a burden. She had changed, truly changed. Her eyes were softer, her words honest, her laughter real. She had gone back to school, gotten a steady accounting job, and moved back home, not out of pity, but to rebuild the bond we both had almost lost forever. One afternoon, as Serenity napped in her crib, Dawn brought me an envelope. Mom, this came for you. It looks important. I opened it and immediately recognized the logo. It was from the Home and Dignity Foundation, the organization I had started with part of my husband's inheritance. What began as one small house offering refuge to elderly women abandoned by their families had now grown into 3. Inside the envelope was a letter. Dear Mrs. Williams, we are honored to invite you to the grand opening of our 3rd home in your name. Your courage has inspired countless women to stand up for themselves and reclaim their dignity. As I finished reading, my eyes welled up. I never imagined my pain would become someone else's hope. Mom, that's incredible, Dawn said softly. It's not just me, I replied. It's every woman who decided enough was enough. I just happened to go first. A few days later, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, standing there was a familiar face, Judge David Morales. The same man whose courtroom had changed everything. This time, he wasn't in a robe but in a simple gray suit, with a kind smile and a woman beside him. Mrs. Williams, it's good to see you again. This is my wife, Elena. It's an honor, she said warmly, shaking my hand. David has told me so much about you. They came inside, and after a few minutes of catching up, the judge said, The Association of Retired Judges wants to present you with an award for your work with the Foundation, and for reminding us all that justice isn't just about laws, it's about humanity. I was speechless. That's not necessary. He smiled. It is. You didn't just win a case, Mrs. Williams. You changed what people believe justice can look like. After they left, Dawn and I sat on the porch while the late afternoon light painted the garden gold. Serenity played nearby with her little yellow toy duck, giggling each time it squeaked. The garden was alive again, violets blooming, wind chimes singing softly. Do you know what I admire most about you, Mom? Dawn asked suddenly. I looked at her. What's that? That after everything I did, after all the pain I caused, you still didn't let your heart turn bitter. I smiled faintly. Oh, I did, for a while. There were nights when anger kept me awake more than grief ever did. But your father's letter reminded me, real power isn't about revenge. It's about transformation, turning pain into something that helps others. She nodded, her eyes shimmering with understanding. That's what you did, Mom. You turned everything they tried to destroy into something beautiful. I reached out, taking her hand, and you, Dawn, turned guilt into courage. That's how I know Serenity will grow up strong, because she'll have a mother who learned from her mistakes and a grandmother who refused to give up. Dawn leaned against my shoulder, quiet for a while, then she whispered, Have you ever wondered what happened to Dave? I shook my head. Victoria said he moved away. Remarried. Probably started over. I wish him peace. Truly, some people are only meant to teach us lessons, not stay in our story forever. She nodded. I'm glad he's gone. I don't want Serenity to ever know that kind of control. She won't, I said softly, because she'll know what strength looks like, and it looks exactly like this. Serenity toddled toward us, her tiny hands clutching a flower she'd picked from the garden. Grandma, look, she squealed. I took the flower and kissed her forehead. It's beautiful, my love. Let's put it in the vase with the others. As we walked back inside, I glanced at the old chipped mug sitting on the counter, the one I'd used every morning for 20 years. It was still cracked, still imperfect, but still holding strong, much like me. That night, after tucking Serenity into her crib and saying goodnight to Dawn, I sat alone in my husband's armchair, the same one Dave once dared to occupy without respect. I held his letter in my hands again. Use your power wisely, my love, not to hurt, but to protect. I smiled through quiet tears. I had done exactly that. I'd used my power to rebuild instead of destroy, to teach instead of punish, to love again without fear. As the moonlight poured through the window, I whispered to the man who had started it all. Rest easy now, my love, our family is safe, and I finally understand what legacy really means. Out in the garden, the violets swayed gently in the night breeze, alive, resilient, and unbroken. And for the first time in years, I knew peace. Sometimes, life tests us in ways we never expect. It takes everything we love, our home, our family, our peace, and pushes us to the edge just to see if we'll break. But as Maeve's story shows, real strength isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It waits, and then rises. Quietly but unshakably, when the time is right. She lost her husband, her daughter's trust, and almost her dignity. But she gained something far greater, self-respect, wisdom, and the power to help others. Her silence became her weapon. Her kindness became her legacy. And her pain became her purpose. Because in the end, justice doesn't always come from the courtroom. Sometimes, it comes from within. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Revenge in Silence, where we share real stories of courage, redemption, and second chances. Leave a comment below. Would you have forgiven Dawn, or would you have walked away? Thank you for watching, and remember, the quietest revenge is living with peace, dignity, and grace.